Writing essays for college-level courses can be an overwhelming process no matter your level of writing experience. The MMCC Writing and Reading Center has created this presentation in order to familiarize you with the most common types of essays, as well as the basic components utilized in almost all academic writing. In absorbing this knowledge and gaining experience applying it, you can become more confident and capable in your academic writing abilities as a whole. There are 5 common essay types you're likely to come across in your studies. The first 3, reflective, response, and comparative, use limited outside sources. The last 2, informative and argumentative or persuasive, require you to synthesize ideas taken from a greater amount of sources to reveal the connections between them. It's important to be aware of the specific differences between these 5 types in order to know how to best approach them. However, it is also necessary to carefully read your instructor's guidelines for each assignment, as he or she may have unique requirements or preferences. The reflective essay centers on your own personal experiences. Often, these types of essays ask you to analyze a specific turning point in your life by examining how it's led to personal change, growth, or development. They may also ask you to reflect upon the impact of a certain issue or topic in your own life. In general, reflective essays require no or limited use of outside sources. In some ways, the response essay is similar to the reflective essay. It also asks you to utilize your own experiences and opinions, but in response to the ideas presented in a specific text. You may try asking yourself questions to determine your response's focus. Which parts of the text do you specifically relate to? Which of the author's ideas do you agree or disagree with? Where in the text does the author say something that causes your own point of view to evolve? The comparative essay is completely source-oriented. Its purpose is to compare and contrast 2 sources that discuss a similar topic. While the basis of comparison depends on the assignment guidelines, content and style are 2 typical focuses. Content-based comparisons focus on pointing out similarities and differences in the author's views, while style-based comparisons analyze their use of rhetorical techniques to reach their intended audience. In other words, content relates to what they are arguing, and style relates to how they make those arguments. The informative essay's purpose is to communicate information on a topic to enhance your audience's understanding. In order to do this, material relating to the topic should be synthesized from multiple sources, each offering a unique perspective. This allows you to present a well-rounded overview of the topic. An informative essay doesn't defend a position or take a side. Instead, it remains objective by avoiding opinion or bias. On the other hand, the argumentative or persuasive essay does take a clear stance on a topic by making a specific, arguable claim. Like informative essays, this is achieved by synthesizing material from multiple sources, the majority of which should provide evidence in support of your argument. It can be helpful to introduce counter-arguments as a way of revealing their weaknesses and further strengthening your own position. However, in doing this, you want to be careful that your argument doesn't get overshadowed. Once you've familiarized yourself with these 5 essay types, it'll become easier to identify what is required from a specific assignment, although it is just as important to consider any guidelines set by your instructor that differ from these descriptions. Although they do differ in purpose and approach, all 5 types tend to follow the same basic pattern of organization. In this pattern, all essays have 3 basic components: introduction, body, and conclusion. Although the content can differ greatly depending on the essay, it's typically best to ensure that all of these elements are included in a way that's easily identifiable to the reader. It should also be noted that this is a general essay structure, and that some instructors may have their own expectations for specific assignments. The introduction is probably the most important part of the essay because it provides a first impression. From the beginning, you'll want to consider your intended audience and tailor the essay's tone and content to their needs. For example, an audience of academics who are already familiar with the topic would be addressed differently than a general audience who has little knowledge of it. Introductory paragraphs usually include 4 primary components. The first component is the hook or attention grabber. This is a way of capturing the reader's interest right away by introducing the topic in an unexpected way. In crafting an effective hook, you'll want to consider your intended audience, as different approaches may draw interest in different ways. Choosing the right hook for your audience can help you to ensure that they are as receptive as possible to your argument or purpose. There are many different types of hooks, but some of the most commonly used are anecdotes, hypothetical scenarios, facts, definitions, or statistics, and open-ended questions that require more than a yes or no answer. Following the hook, you'll want to introduce the background of your topic. It's important to provide the reader with a general context so they'll be prepared to fully engage with the rest of the essay. This should be a broad overview of a few sentences, and its exact focus will depend on the essay type. For example, an argumentative essay would benefit from laying out all sides of an issue, while a comparative essay would likely need to summarize the two sources to be compared. Audience should also continue to be considered, as the construction of this section will depend on what your particular audience needs to know going into the rest of the essay. The background section should gradually narrow into a preview of the main points. This is where the primary ideas to be covered in the essay's body paragraphs will be briefly summarized. You want to give the audience an idea of how the essay will progress so that they can more easily follow the development of your argument. Finally, the thesis is one or two sentences at the end of the introduction that make a claim representing the essay's overall purpose or goal. It should clarify for the audience what you want them to come away with. For example, an argumentative thesis will take a position or stance, while an informative thesis may instead state what you want the reader to learn and/or why. A successful thesis requires balance between generalization and specificity. It shouldn't be so broad that it can't be adequately argued, but it also shouldn't be so narrow that it won't provide enough material for an entire essay. The number of body paragraphs will vary, but most well-developed essays include at least 3. The most common formats for body paragraphs are block and alternating. A block paragraph focuses on a single source, while an alternating paragraph draws on multiple sources to focus on a single topic. It's important to note that alternating format is often viewed as more sophisticated in academic writing, which means that it is generally preferred by most instructors. In particular, MMCC instructors require that the alternating format be used in synthesis essays. In both formats, each paragraph should include a topic sentence, supporting evidence, and a conclusion sentence. The topic sentence clearly and concisely introduces the main idea of the paragraph. This will typically be a smaller scale claim that lends support to your overall argument. If following a previous body paragraph, it may incorporate a transition that ties the topics of both paragraphs together. Body paragraphs should end on a conclusion sentence that wraps up the paragraph by reminding the reader of its main takeaway in a definitive way. The topic and conclusion sentences should be sandwiched by evidence that directly supports the paragraph's main idea. In most essays, this will require the incorporation of ideas from outside sources. There are several considerations to keep in mind when using outside sources, since it's important to give them full credit for their words and ideas. As a rule of thumb, it's best to use direct quotes smartly and sparingly. The frequency with which direct quotes are used depends on several factors. First, consider the essay's documentation style. For example, the use of direct quotes is less common in APA than in MLA and other styles. Another contributing factor is discipline. While an English essay that analyzes an author's work will be more likely to employ frequent quoting, a sociology or history essay may tend to rely more on summarized information. Finally, it's important to consider audience and the method through which information will be conveyed most clearly to them. In general, try to summarize and paraphrase as much as possible and save quotes for when they would be most effective. For example, if the author's phrasing is especially impactful or difficult to reword without losing meaning. When you do incorporate quotes, it's important to cite them according to documentation style guidelines. For example, APA requires author, year, and page number in parenthetical citations, while MLA prefers only author and page number. Moreover, quotes should be introduced using a signal phrase, such as Smith states or according to Smith. The signal phrase may need to be expanded to clarify the quote's context if it wouldn't be immediately obvious to the reader. Finally, it's important to further explain or analyze quotes afterward so that the reader isn't left confused by their relevance. Another important element to consider is the use of discipline-specific language and terminology. Often, including these helps to illustrate your understanding and familiarity with the discipline, which can lend you more credibility as a writer. However, it's always important to consider your intended audience in doing so. If they would likely be unfamiliar with any of the discipline-specific terminology used, be sure to provide clear definitions. Once your argument has been made through the body paragraphs, a concluding paragraph helps bring the essay to a satisfying close. While less structured than an introductory paragraph, there are three major components to consider. Restating the thesis is a way to remind the reader of the essay's main claim. Similarly, a summary of the essay's main points consolidates all of your evidence collected into one place in order to definitively illustrate how it comes together to support the main claim. Finally, a closing discussion can be used to leave the reader with something to think about. For example, you might ponder the future of an issue or topic, emphasize the need for continuing research, or reiterate the importance of knowledge surrounding it. Another possibility is calling back to your opening hook. For example, if you asked a question, you could attempt to answer it. The more familiar and experienced you become with basic essay structure, the easier it will be to modify or tweak it in a way that benefits a particular essay style. While all introductions and conclusions typically include the same elements, you may find that different essays benefit from having these elements presented in a different order. Similarly, you may find that your essay would be enhanced by the inclusion of unconventional body paragraphs. For example, an informative essay may need an entire paragraph devoted to background information, while an argumentative essay may be strengthened by a paragraph devoted solely to counterarguments. In the end, the organization of your essay and reasoning behind it should come across as logical and clear to the reader. It should also fulfill the assignment's requirements as set out by your instructor, which may sometimes differ from the general essay guidelines I've discussed. Continuing experience with this basic essay structure can ultimately equip you with the confidence and knowledge to craft increasingly sophisticated academic essays.